Here, take this. You look hungry. Thank you. Slow down, it's okay. It's so good.
Thank you so much for the food. I will marry you when I become rich.
The afternoon sun burned softly over a quiet street beside an abandoned factory. A rusted fence stretched along the sidewalk, its metal wires twisted with age. Standing beside it was a thin 14-year-old boy named Daniel. His clothes were worn and dusty. The sleeves of his gray hoodie were torn and his sandals looked like they had survived too many journeys. Daniel hadn't eaten since the previous day. His stomach twisted painfully, but he tried not to show it. People passed by him on the sidewalk, workers, traders, students, but nobody stopped. To them, Daniel was just another poor boy standing on the street, invisible. Daniel stared down the road, wondering how long he could keep surviving like this. Then suddenly, a soft voice broke the silence. "Are you okay?" Daniel turned. Standing behind him was a 12-year-old girl in a faded school uniform. Her name was Grace. 2 neat braids fell over her shoulders and she held a small blue lunchbox tightly in her hands.
Wait! Before we continue, smash that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss amazing African folktale stories like this. Hit the like button if this story moved you. It really helps our channel grow. Comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and which part of the story touched you the most. I want to see all your thoughts. And if you're craving more African folktales, check out the Bumt app on the Play Store. Hundreds of stories waiting for you. Okay, now let's get back to the story.
Grace studied the boy carefully. He looked hungry, very hungry. "Have you eaten today?" she asked. Daniel quickly shook his head. "I'm fine." But right on cue, his stomach growled loudly. Grace tried not to laugh. She slowly opened her lunchbox. Inside was rice and beans her sister had packed for her lunch. She stretched the lunchbox toward him. "Eat this." Daniel blinked in surprise. "That's your food." Grace shrugged casually. "I can eat later." It wasn't true. She had also been hungry all day at school, but something about Daniel's tired eyes made her feel sorry for him. Slowly, Daniel accepted the lunchbox. He sat down beside the rusted fence and began eating carefully, trying not to appear too desperate. But the truth was, it was the best meal he had eaten in days. Grace watched him with a proud smile. When Daniel finished, he wiped his mouth and looked at her. For the first time that day, his face softened. "Thank you." Grace nodded. "You're welcome." Daniel stared at her for a moment, thinking deeply. Then he said something that made Grace burst into laughter. "One day, when I become rich," Grace tilted her head curiously, "I will marry you." Grace laughed so hard she almost dropped the lunchbox. "You're too big to marry me." Daniel laughed too, but inside his heart, the words were not a joke. He meant them. Neither of them knew that life would soon pull them in completely different directions. But that small promise beside the rusted fence would follow them for many years. And one day, it would come back to change everything. 8 years passed. Life moved on, but not always in the direction people expected. Grace was now 20 years old. After the death of their parents years earlier, she had been living with her older sister Sarah and her husband Mark. Sarah loved Grace deeply. Grace had moved into their house when she was just 12 years old, and since then, Sarah had taken care of her like a mother. Everyone in their compound knew Grace as the quiet girl. She rarely argued. She avoided trouble. Most days, she stayed indoors helping with house chores or reading. Sarah trusted her completely. "My sister is a good girl," she often told neighbors proudly. But Sarah's husband, Mark, had recently started seeing things differently. One evening, while Sarah was arranging the goods she brought back from the market, Mark entered the sitting room looking unusually serious. "Sarah," he said quietly. She looked up. "Yes?" "We need to talk about Grace." Sarah frowned slightly. "What about her?" Mark lowered his voice. "I've been seeing her with a boy." Sarah laughed immediately. "That's impossible." Mark didn't laugh. "I'm serious." Sarah shook her head. "She's still a child. I saw them together at night." Sarah stopped arranging her goods. "Where?" "Behind the clothes shop near the junction." Sarah stared at him. "You must be mistaken." But Mark's expression remained firm. "I know what I saw." Still, Sarah refused to believe him. To her, Grace was still the gentle little sister she had raised, not someone secretly meeting boys at night. But Mark was becoming more suspicious every day, and that suspicion was slowly turning to anger. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere inside the house began to change. Mark had started watching Grace closely. Every time she stepped outside, every time she returned home, every time she spoke on the phone. One evening, Grace returned from fetching water just as darkness was falling. Mark was already standing near the door, waiting. "Where were you?" he asked sharply. Grace looked surprised. "I went to get water." "Don't lie to me." Sarah rushed out of the kitchen when she heard the shouting. "What is going on?" Mark pointed angrily at Grace. "This girl thinks I'm a fool." Sarah tried to calm him down. "Mark, please lower your voice." But Mark was already furious. "I saw you again near that shop with that boy." Grace's eyes widened in shock. "That's not true." But Mark had already lost control of his temper. Before Sarah could stop him, he threw a stick leaning against the wall and struck Grace. The girl cried out in pain. "Stop!" Sarah shouted. Finally, Mark threw the stick aside. Breathing heavily, he said something that froze the entire room. "If she gets pregnant in this house, she will leave." Grace wiped her tears quietly. She didn't say another word. From that night forward, she stopped going outside completely. But the tension inside the house only continued to grow. None of them knew that something far worse was about to happen. Something that would soon shake the entire community. And when the truth finally came out, it would destroy everything they believed about each other. 3 weeks passed after the night Mark flogged Grace. The house became strangely quiet. Grace hardly spoke to anyone anymore. She stayed indoors most days, helping with chores or sitting quietly in the corner of the house. Sarah felt bad for her younger sister, but she also understood her husband's anger. Mark was the one paying the children's school fees and handling most of the household expenses. He had a hot temper, but Sarah believed he meant well. Still, something about the situation didn't sit right with her. Then one morning, everything changed. It was a normal market day. Sarah had left early to open her stall. Grace remained at home while Mark prepared to leave for work. But around mid-morning, something unexpected happened. A group of angry young men from the community stormed into the compound. Neighbors began to gather immediately. People whispered among themselves as the shouting grew louder. Within minutes, chaos filled the entire compound. By the time Sarah heard the news at the market, it was already too late. A young boy ran into the market shouting her name. "Sarah!" She turned in confusion. "What happened?" The boy was breathing heavily. "Community boys carried your husband." Sarah's heart skipped. "Carried him where?" "They are beating him." For a moment, Sarah's mind went blank. Her basket fell from her hands. Without thinking, she began running, barefoot, straight toward her house. By the time Sarah reached their compound, the place had already turned into complete chaos. Neighbors stood everywhere, whispering and pointing, but Mark was no longer there. They took him to the community square, one woman told her. Sarah's heart pounded violently. What happened? The woman hesitated before answering. Then she spoke the words that shattered Sarah's world. They said He raped Grace. For a moment, the entire world seemed to stop spinning. Sarah felt the cloth tied around her waist loosen and fall to the ground, but she didn't even notice. She began running again. Like a mad woman, her children ran behind her crying. People stared as she raced through the streets toward the community square. When she finally arrived, the scene before her nearly made her collapse. Mark was lying on the ground, almost naked. A group of angry community boys surrounded him, whipping him mercilessly. His body was covered in bruises and blood. Sarah could barely recognize her own husband. She screamed and rushed forward. "Stop! Please stop!" But the boys pushed her away. "If you come closer, we will flog you too." Sarah fell to her knees crying. Some neighbors quickly pulled her away before the boys turned their anger on her. That was when she saw Grace. Grace was sitting on the ground beside one of the boys. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Sarah crawled toward her. "Grace, what happened?" Grace wiped her tears and spoke weakly. "He raped me this morning, after you left for the market." Sarah froze. Her heart felt like it had been stabbed. Grace continued crying. "I had no choice. I had to call the community boys." Sarah covered her mouth in shock. Then suddenly, something inside her mind clicked. Now she understood why Mark had been so angry with Grace all those months. Grace looked down and whispered softly, "I kept rejecting him. That's why he hated me." Sarah felt like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. Behind them, Mark struggled to speak from the ground. "I didn't do it," he shouted weakly, but nobody was listening. The beating finally stopped when several elders from the community arrived. They ordered the boys to step back. Mark was forced to sit on the dusty ground, bleeding and barely able to breathe. One elderly man looked at Sarah seriously. "Do you believe your husband could do such a thing?" Sarah's mind was spinning. She didn't know what to say. Mark had cheated on her once during a difficult time in their marriage. Because of that memory, doubt crept quietly into her heart. I don't know," she whispered. Another woman spoke up. "Ask the children who were in the house." But the children Sarah had left at home were too small to understand what had happened. Meanwhile, the community boys demanded justice. "We are taking him to the police." The crowd began shouting angrily. But before things escalated further, the elders raised their hands. "This matter will be handled by the community." The crowd fell silent. After discussing among themselves, the elders announced their judgment. Sarah felt her heart pounding as they spoke. "You will pay compensation." The elder pointed at Grace. 300,000 naira for the girl's treatment. He continued, 200,000 naira for cleansing the community, and another 200,000 naira to settle this matter. 700,000 naira. Sarah almost fainted. They barely had enough money to survive. Where would they find such an amount? But the elders were firm. "If you refuse, we send him to the police." Sarah knew what that meant. Prison, and the complete destruction of their family. That day, calls were made to relatives, friends were contacted, people borrowed money desperately, and even after the payments were made, Mark still spent the night locked inside the community cell. But the real damage had already been done, because the entire community now believed one thing: Mark was a rapist, and Sarah's family would never be the same again. The following morning, the sun rose quietly over the community, but inside Sarah's home, nothing felt normal anymore. After the full payment was finally gathered, the elders ordered the community boys to release Mark from the community cell. When Mark returned home, he could barely walk. His face was swollen. His lips were cracked. His back carried deep red marks from the lashes he had received the previous day. Two of his relatives supported him as they slowly helped him into the house. Neighbors stood outside watching. Some whispered, some shook their heads, some simply stared with silent judgment. Sarah could feel their eyes burning through the walls of the house. The shame was unbearable. Mark's parents arrived soon after. The moment they saw his condition, his mother burst into tears. "Who did this to my son?" she cried. But everyone already knew the answer. Inside the house, Mark sat quietly on the edge of the bed, his breathing slow and painful. Sarah stood across the room, staring at him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Mark looked at her. His voice was weak but firm. "I didn't do what Grace said." Sarah felt anger rise inside her. "How can you still deny it? I'm telling the truth." She shook her head bitterly. "You expect me to believe that my own sister lied about something like that?" Mark's voice cracked. "Yes." The word hung heavily in the room. Sarah felt like something inside her mind snapped. "For the sake of my sanity," she said slowly, "I can't stay here anymore." The next morning, Sarah packed a small bag. She gathered her children, and without looking back, she left the house. Mark watched from the doorway as her family walked away. He didn't try to stop her. He only stood there silently because he knew that no matter what he said, no one believed him anymore. And somewhere out there, the girl who had started everything had completely disappeared.
Wait, you can enjoy more stories from our Bumt app on Play Store. Go over to Play Store, search for Bumt, install the app instantly for free. Hundreds of stories waiting for you to watch. Or check the description of this video. The app link is there. Open it and download Bumt app instantly today. See you on Bumt.
Life slowly moved forward, but Sarah's heart remained heavy. After leaving her husband's house, she moved in with her mother along with her children. Her family supported her decision completely. In fact, they had only one message for her: never go back to that man again. Every day, Sarah tried to focus on her market business and raising her children, but the memories of everything that happened refused to leave her mind. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Sarah was arranging goods in her small market stall when a familiar shadow appeared in front of her. She looked up. Her heart skipped. It was Mark. For a moment, anger filled her chest. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. Some traders nearby immediately turned their heads, curious about the situation. Sarah tried to ignore him. "Leave my shop," she said firmly. But Mark didn't move. One of the neighboring traders spoke quietly to Sarah. "Let him talk," the woman advised. "You can't keep running forever." Sarah hesitated. Then she sighed heavily and pulled down the metal shutter of the store halfway. The market noise faded slightly as they sat inside. For the first time since the incident, Sarah and Mark were alone. Mark looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally. "I came to tell you the truth again," he said quietly. Sarah crossed her arms. "You've already said it." "I didn't rape Grace." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "Mark, he swears to you." His voice cracked slightly. "That morning, I was preparing to leave for work when those boys suddenly came into the compound. I didn't even understand what was happening." Sarah studied his face carefully. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she finally said quietly, "I will think about what you said." Mark nodded slowly. That was all he had hoped for. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the conversation with Mark over and over again. What if he was telling the truth? What if her sister had really lied? But the thought felt impossible. Why would Grace lie about something so serious? Sarah prayed quietly before going to bed. "God, please guide me." And in the silence of that night, something strange happened. A calm voice seemed to settle inside her heart. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet feeling. Forgive him. Sarah sat up on the bed. Her heart was beating slowly. If he is lying, she whispered to herself, then that is between him and God. Another thing also began bothering her. Ever since the incident, nobody had seen Grace again. Some neighbors said she had been living outside the town with one of the community boys. Others said she ran away with a young man. Nobody really knew the truth. The girl who had caused the entire disaster had simply disappeared, and somehow that silence began to disturb Sarah deeply. The next morning, Sarah made a decision that shocked everyone around her. She went back to Mark. When she arrived at the house, Mark was sitting quietly outside. When he saw her, he stood up slowly in disbelief. "You came back." Sarah nodded. "I have decided something." Mark waited anxiously. "If you are lying," Sarah said slowly, "then that is between you and God." Mark's eyes filled with tears. "But I am choosing to forgive you." The words hung in the air like thunder. Sarah's family reacted with pure anger when they heard the news. Her mother shouted, her siblings insulted her. "If you go back to that man, we will disown you." But Sarah had already made her mind. "I'm following what my heart tells me." Despite the insults and threats, Sarah returned to her husband's house with her children. Slowly, life began to settle again. The community gossip eventually faded. People moved on to other problems. But deep inside Sarah's heart, the wound never truly healed. And somewhere out there, Grace was still missing for 3 long years, until one day, a shocking piece of news finally arrived.
3 years passed after the terrible scandal that almost destroyed Sarah's marriage. Slowly, life began to settle again. Sarah returned fully to her market business, and Mark worked hard every day trying to rebuild both his reputation and his peace of mind. The community gossip eventually faded. People stopped whispering when Sarah walked past, but inside Sarah's heart, the wound never truly healed. Every now and then, the memory of that day would return to her mind. The sight of her husband lying on the ground in the community square, bleeding, while the whole village watched. And then there was Grace, the sister who had disappeared without a trace. For 3 long years, nobody saw her. Nobody knew where she went. Sometimes, late at night, Sarah would wonder if Grace was even still alive. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Sarah was sitting in her market stall arranging goods when one of her close friends rushed toward her. The woman looked shocked. "Sarah, I think I saw your sister." Sarah froze immediately. "What did you say?" "I saw Grace in traffic." Sarah's hands stopped moving. Her friend continued. "She was hawking pure water." The words felt unbelievable. Grace, hawking pure water? But then the woman added something that made Sarah's heart tighten painfully. She had a baby tied to her back. For several seconds, Sarah could not speak. Her sister, who was lived safely under her roof, now struggling in traffic with a baby? Sarah slowly looked down at the table in front of her. Then she quietly continued arranging her goods, pretending she had not heard anything. But inside her chest, something heavy had begun to move. Over the next few weeks, more rumors started reaching Sarah. Some traders said they had seen Grace around different parts of town. The story slowly became clearer. After leaving Sarah's house, Grace had been living with a boy she secretly loved, but the relationship didn't last. The boy eventually abandoned her, leaving her alone with a baby and no support. People said life had become extremely difficult for her. Some even said hunger was slowly destroying her. But Sarah tried to ignore the news. The pain from the past was still too deep. Then, one evening, something happened that Sarah never expected. Her phone rang. When she answered, the voice on the other end belonged to her mother. They had barely spoken in years. Her mother didn't waste time. "Grace and I are coming to your house this weekend." Sarah felt her chest tighten. What for? She wanted to confess. Sarah felt confused. After 3 years of silence, what could Grace possibly want to confess now? When Sarah told Mark about the phone call, his reaction was immediate. No. His voice was cold. She is not stepping into this house. Sarah tried to reason with him. She wanted to apologize.
Mark shook his head firmly. After everything she did to me, the memory of the humiliation still burned inside him. But after long pleading from Sarah and the children, Mark finally sighed. Fine. He looked away. But whatever she wants to say, she will say it once. None of them knew that the truth about to be revealed would shake the entire community again. The day Grace arrived felt strangely heavy. Even the air in the compound seemed tense. Around midday, a car stopped outside Sarah and Mark's house. Grace stepped out slowly. She looked completely different. The girl Sarah once knew had vanished. Her body was thin. Her face looked weak and tired. Her clothes hung loosely on her fragile frame, and tied gently to her back was a small baby. For a moment, Sarah could barely recognize her own sister. Grace entered the compound slowly. Then suddenly, she dropped to her knees. Tears poured down her face. "I'm sorry," she cried. The entire compound fell silent. Mark stood near the doorway, watching her carefully. Grace turned toward him and bowed her head deeply. Then she said the words that stunned everyone. "I lied." The air suddenly felt heavy. Grace continued crying as she spoke. "I wanted freedom." She wiped her eyes. "But Mark always stopped me from going out." Her voice trembled. "So the boy I was seeing and I made a plan." Everyone in the compound leaned closer. Grace's voice became weaker. "We decided to accuse him." Gasps spread through the crowd. Sarah felt her legs weaken. Grace continued speaking through her tears. "One of the community boys helped us start the story." At that moment, Sarah suddenly ran out of the house, screaming, "Everybody, come and hear this." Her voice echoed throughout the entire neighborhood. Within minutes, neighbors began gathering in the compound. People filled the yard. The place looked like a marketplace. Grace sat on the ground, crying as she repeated her confession. Mark stood frozen. Then suddenly, the strong man who had endured 3 years of humiliation broke down. He began to cry, not quietly, but like a wounded child. After everything, he shouted. After the beating, the shame, the lies, his family arrived shortly after hearing the news. They were furious. They demanded that Grace be taken to the police immediately. But Sarah stood between them. "If you send her to prison in this condition," she said softly, "she might not survive it." Grace continued crying on the ground. The same sister who once destroyed their lives now looked completely broken. The compound remained filled with tension. Some people said she should be forgiven. Others said justice must be done. Even now, years later, Sarah still remembers that moment clearly. The day the truth finally came out, the day her husband's innocence was proven, and the day she learned something painful about life. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And sometimes, forgiveness is the hardest choice a person will ever make. If this story touched you, please share it, subscribe, and join our community for more stories that matter. Your support helps us keep sharing real stories with real lessons. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.
So tell me, what lessons have you actually learned? I would really love to see your comments in the comment section down below. And remember to support this channel. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Just say something. Tell me, where are you watching from and which part of the story touched you the most? I would love to see all in the comment section below.